The iPhone Air has never been known to have a great battery life, but the iPhone Air 2 could finally change that, thanks to some brand new battery technologies showcased at CES 2026 and also some other major improvements across the industry. So here's why the iPhone Air 2 could and should be a true battery breakthrough. Okay, so even though the main display highlights at CES were the new RGB displays, which are an evolution of Mini LED, the OLED technology was not left behind. Samsung and LG both announced new developments showing that they are working on OLED panels that are not just brighter, but also thinner than ever. LG even showcased a new wallpaper OLED TV with an overall thickness of just 9mm. And keep in mind, that's for the entire TV. The panel itself is only a fraction of that. So what does this mean for the second-gen iPhone Air? Well, it shows that the technology already exists to create significantly thinner display panels, making it entirely realistic for future devices like the iPhone Air 2 to benefit from these advancements. What's even better is that we've actually had reports of the iPhone Air 2 using a new display technology that is likely to be introduced with the iPhone Fold later this year. These new displays would use CoE, or Color Filter on Encapsulation. One of the biggest advantages of CoE is higher brightness, and of course, it would enable the device to be even thinner. And that higher brightness would also make our wallpapers look better than ever, especially our latest Resonant Radiance pack by Hanin, one of my favorite packs this month that I've been using on all of my devices. Link down below. But speaking of thinner OLED displays, these would basically free up extra internal space that could be used to improve one of the iPhone Air's biggest weaknesses: its battery life. In my full review, I mentioned that the battery life was quite bad. I've had days where I would unplug it at 7 AM and by 12:30 PM, it was completely dead. That's not acceptable for a modern flagship, no matter how thin it is. Now, Apple could technically use a thinner panel to slim the phone down even further, but with the iPhone Air already measuring 5.6mm thin, it's already thinner than the Galaxy S25 Edge, so making it even thinner may not be the smartest move. A larger and thicker battery enabled by that thinner display stack would likely make a much bigger difference in everyday use, even if they do keep the same high-density lithium-ion battery technology. What would make an even bigger difference, however, would be the move to silicon carbon, something that I've been hoping and pushing companies to switch to for years now. These batteries replace part of the graphite in the anode with silicon. And because silicon can store far more lithium, the energy density and charging speeds automatically get better. But think of it this way: if the new display technology would allow, let's say, a battery that's 20% thicker, and then the silicon carbon technology would enable that battery to be 20% more energy dense, it will lead to a battery that is about 40 to 60% higher in capacity compared to the one that we currently have in the iPhone Air. That's pretty much what Honor did with their newly announced Magic 8 Pro Air, which directly competes with the iPhone Air and the S25 Edge. Now, the Honor Magic 8 Pro Air is slightly thicker, coming in at 6.1mm as opposed to 5.8 on the S25 Edge and 5.6 on the Air. However, it's got a massive battery. It's got a silicon carbon battery that's 5,500 mAh in capacity. That's 75% higher capacity than in the iPhone Air, whilst only being a tiny bit thicker. In fact, this battery is larger than even on the iPhone 17 Pro Max, the Google Pixel 10 Pro XL, and the S25 Ultra. Of course, mAh do not directly translate to battery life, since software optimization, CPU efficiency, and other factors do also matter. If you take a look at the Xiaomi 17 Pro Max, for example, it's got a 50% larger battery than the iPhone 17 Pro Max at 7,500 mAh, but it actually lasts the same or even less than the iPhone. But if Apple were to add a battery like this to a second-gen iPhone Air, combined with their iOS optimizations and a newer, more efficient A20 Pro chip, its battery life could be insane. Like, even if they settle for, let's say, 4,500 or 5,000 mAh instead of the Honor Magic 8 Pro Air's 5,500 capacity, it would still be a massive upgrade over what we currently have in the iPhone Air, which is just barely over 3,000 mAh. So yeah, I do really hope that Apple starts taking notes from what Honor did here. I mean, Honor has clearly been very inspired by the iPhone Air here. Like, they even have the same color as the iPhone 17 Pros, right? The same orange, and the back looks quite similar as well. So Apple returning the favor, so to say, would make a lot of sense. Drop a like if you would like to see Apple finally start using silicon carbon batteries in their upcoming iPhones. Which brings us to the big question. Why hasn't Apple made the move to silicon carbon yet? Well, the answer is unknown, but it's probably scale. Apple sells tens of millions of iPhones every year, and in some cases, over 200 million units like with the iPhone 6 from back in the day. That production volume is far larger than what most Chinese smartphone manufacturers operate at, so switching to new battery technology at that scale is not easy. That's because production yields need to be extremely high, supply chains need to be very stable, and of course the failure rates of those batteries need to be close to zero as well. Tim Cook has always been the company's supply chain mastermind even before becoming a CEO, so this must be one of the reasons why Apple isn't willing to make the move yet. But my guess is that Apple is simply waiting until silicon carbon batteries are mature enough to meet their quality standards at that massive scale. That's just my personal take. We'll see what happens with the iPhone Fold in September, if that adopts silicon carbon or not. But anyway, let me know in the comment section down below, what do you guys think is the reason why Apple has not switched to silicon carbon yet? And not just Apple, but Samsung and Google as well, which do sell way less units than Apple, especially Google. Now, there's another side to battery life that often gets overlooked with ultra-thin phones, and that's thermals. Thin designs look great, but they leave very little room for the heat to dissipate, especially if the phone is made out of titanium like the iPhone Air. And of course, excess heat is one of the biggest enemies when it comes to battery efficiency. When a phone runs hot, the processor throttles more aggressively, the display also dims, and the battery life, of course, drains faster. Over time, this heat can lead to battery degradation, which in turn leads to worse battery life in the long run. Apple could add a vapor cooling chamber inside, but this will only make the air thicker. That's where a silicon carbon battery can help. Not because it magically runs cooler, but because higher energy density can free up internal space for better heat dissipation. And paired with a more efficient display, the iPhone Air 2 could also generate less heat, even without making the phone thicker. Now, speaking of batteries, Apple has also pushed a new firmware update for the iPhone Air's MagSafe battery pack, likely to improve its performance. It's not clear what those improvements are, but it is possible that those optimizations also carry over to the iPhone Air itself, since it actually uses the exact same battery. But updates like this usually fly under the radar when Apple releases an update such as iOS 26.2.1. Sometimes they don't even mention those in the footnotes. And on a separate note, as of last week, the designer of the iPhone Air, Abhidur Chaudhuri, I probably butchered your name, but he's left Apple in order to join Hark, a recently founded AI startup. And while we don't yet know what this will mean for the second-gen iPhone Air, if its design will change in any way, I do still think that the Air 2 has a real chance of solidifying the current formula that the iPhone Air is. Especially with those thinner OLED panels, smarter thermal management, and potentially silicon carbon batteries. Apple could finally eliminate the Air's biggest weakness without compromising on its design. Which means that the only other weakness left to solve would be the lack of a secondary camera module. And according to leaker Digital Chat Station on Weibo, Apple would actually be solving that issue by including a secondary lens on the iPhone Air 2. However, this is said to be an ultra-wide lens and not a telephoto like I was hoping for, so pretty much the same lens as in the iPhone 17, the upcoming iPhone 18, and the 48 megapixel ultra-wide that we also have on the Pro iPhones. And even though I do think that's a really good lens, I much prefer having a telephoto myself, as I can always step back to take a photo, but most of the times I cannot get closer to a subject from the distance, especially if it's far away. So for me, I just tend to use a telephoto way more often than the ultra-wide. Now, one way in which Apple could solve this would be by adding AI-powered enhancements to their digital zoom on their main module, similar to what Google has done with their ProRes zoom, which basically regenerates an image above 30x for some really impressive results. And other manufacturers like Honor, for example, have done similar things. Although that's technically not a fully real photo anymore if you think about it, so yeah, I would still love to hear your thoughts on this. But anyway, the iPhone Air 2 should be a pretty decent upgrade over the iPhone Air 1, which makes sense as we're not expecting it until next year. So Apple has plenty of time to improve on the first gen. Until then, check out our new wallpapers that I'm absolutely in love with. And stay tuned for more Alex episodes on the iPhone Air 2, the iPhone 18, 18 Pro, and anything that's Apple and also not just Apple related. I'm Daniel, this is ZONEofTECH, and I'll see you guys in the next one. ZONEofTECH, signing out. Cheers.